Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Stadium Stats. This week we're going to be doing something a little different. I'm going to be predicting each of these upcoming week's NFL games. Let's get right into it. Looking to Thursday night football, we've got the Jacksonville Jaguars taking on the New Orleans Saints. The Jaguars coming off a pretty big win over the Colts, 37-20. They looked really good on both offense and especially that defense. That defense is forcing a lot of pressure on quarterbacks, getting a lot of turnovers, and looks much improved from last season. Josh Allen on that defense looks incredible. Trevor Lawrence finally is starting to pick up the pace, though, on offense. Christian Kirk looks very consistent and good. Calvin Ridley, not always very consistent, but very good player, adds a lot to that offense. And Travis Etienne continues to get touchdowns, a lot of yards. Looking at the Saints, they lost last week to the Texans 20-13. Derek Carr looked okay. He had over 300 yards. Rashid Shaheed, Michael Thomas, and Chris Olave continue to be a really good receiving trio, but they can't get much going on the ground. Their defense doesn't look as dominant as it once did, although their defense did hold the Texans to 20, which isn't bad. But I do think I'm going to pick the Jaguars this week. I think they just have a more all-around well-balanced team. They are better on offense than the Saints. They're better on defense than the Saints as well. I don't see them losing this one. Going to Sunday football, our first game is the Falcons taking on the Buccaneers, a divisional matchup. Last week, the Bucs lost 6-20 to the Lions. Really poor showing. Baker Mayfield looked really bad. They couldn't get a run game. They haven't been able to get a run game going the entire season. But their pass game really couldn't get going either. They didn't score a single touchdown. And then the Falcons, they lost to the Commanders, who had just lost bad to the Bears. That's also not a very good look for them. Desmond Ridder did throw for over 300 yards, but he had 3 turnovers. He continues to be what's holding this team back, as all the other pieces seem to be in place for them to go to the playoffs or at least the wild card. But Desmond Ridder seems to be holding them back. I do see this being a close game, especially as a divisional matchup, but I do think the Bucs are going to take the win here over the Falcons, but we'll see. Our third game is the Las Vegas Raiders versus the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears coming off a really ugly week. They lost to the Vikings, who are also not a very good team. Justin Fields got hurt, has a dislocated thumb, and will not be playing in this game. They have injuries all over their O-line and just don't seem very good on either side of the ball. Their offense does seem a little bit improved as the season has continued. However, they don't seem like they're anywhere near competing, whereas the Raiders are also not a very dominant team. They did win last week over the Patriots, but the Patriots are one of the worst teams in the league. I do think the Raiders have this one in the books, though. The Bears have injuries all over their O-line. They have an injured quarterback, and the Raiders have one of the best pass rush in the league. Max Crosby is one of the most dominant pass rushers, especially this season, but in the entire league. And I just think he's going to put too much pressure on that injured O-line of the Bears, and with a rookie quarterback in Tyson Bagent, I don't see him doing much. Moving on to our next game, we've got the Cleveland Browns taking on the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts, as I said earlier, they fell to the Jaguars. Anthony Richardson, unfortunately, is going to miss the remainder of the season, getting shoulder surgery. He was very exciting to watch as a rookie, but he'll have to come back next year, and luckily they have Gardner Minshew to hold down the fort in the meantime. Josh Downs and Michael Pittman are making a really good receiving duo. Josh Downs is their rookie receiver this year, and he looks really good in combination with Pittman, who's been really consistent and played really well in almost every game this year. Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss are a really good running back duo. Taylor just got a huge contract. Zach Moss is second in the league in rushing yards, and they're going to make a really good duo, especially as Taylor continues to get more work. And then the Browns, coming off a major win over the 49ers. Their defense is on a historic pace. They've only let up 7 touchdowns on defense the entire year. They've let up barely over 1,000 yards at 1,002. and are just making historic pace. They took down the San Francisco 49ers, who looked like the most dominant team in the league. Yes, they did have a few injuries in this game, but the Browns' defense really just made Brock Purdy look really bad in this game. He looked human for the first time since starting in the league, and no other defense has been able to do that to the 49ers offense. So I do think I'm going to take the Browns winning this game, as their defense is just super dominant and the Colts have injuries that are piling up. But this could be a really good game, as the Colts do have a decent amount of offensive weapons and the Browns have a really good defense. Moving on to what's probably not going to be a great game in the Commanders facing the Giants. The Commanders, as I said earlier, they beat the Atlanta Falcons. Nice rebound win after a 3-game losing streak, including a big loss to the Bears. The Giants continue to look horrible. They did their defense did look really good, though, against the Bills, as they held the Bills to only 10 points the entire game. But that might just be the Bills' offensive incompetency rather than the Giants' defense playing really well. We've still yet to see that, as the Bills' offense did struggle the week before as well in London against Jacksonville. So I really don't know if the Giants have any positives on this team. They do continue to look like one of the worst teams in the league, and for that reason, I'm going to take the Commanders. Moving on to what could be one of the better games of the week, we've got the Detroit Lions taking on the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens last week, winning in London over Tennessee. They honestly, on offense, did not look that great. They did score 24 points, but they only had one touchdown the whole game. It was to their rookie receiver, Zay Flowers, who continues to look really good. Lamar Jackson to Mark Andrews connection continues to look electric as well. But they don't really have much else on offense. And their defense is very dominant. But without their offense scoring touchdowns, which scoring 24 points from one touchdown and the rest being field goals, the red zone offense is not very efficient, clearly. But looking at the Detroit Lions, they came off a major win over the Buccaneers. 4 of their 5 wins this season are by double-digit points. They look really good on offense. They have the best run defense in the league, which was the only thing that was holding them back last year, as their defense was really bad last year. But this year, it's super improved. Best run defense in the league. Their offense is firing on all cylinders. They've finally got Jameson Williams back from his suspension. He's able to stretch the field and take up a lot of the defensive players' eyes, as they have to account for his speed. I do have the Ravens in a slight upset win here, as their defense is really dominant and their offense did put up a lot of points even with poor red zone efficiency. But they do match up pretty poorly with the Lions, as the Ravens like to run the ball very heavily and the Lions are really good at stopping the run. So I would not be surprised if it went the other way, but I do have the Ravens beating the Lions this week, but we'll see. Moving on to another divisional matchup, we've got the Buffalo Bills taking on the New England Patriots. The Bills, as I said earlier, really rough showing against the Giants. They won 14-9. They didn't score any points in the first half. Josh Allen looked really bad in the first half. Their whole team honestly looked really bad in the first half. And while they did come back, it was against the New York Football Giants, who are one of the worst teams in the entire league. That was a really poor showing. Their running game did get going, though. Latavius Murray and James Cook combined for a decent amount of yards, and they were much more efficient on the ground than they were in the air for a majority of that game. Looking at the Patriots, they do seem to be one of the worst teams in the entire league. They only have one win. They got shut out. They scored a combined 3 points in 2 weeks and lost a point differential of almost 70 over the past 2 weeks. They did have a nice rebound last week against the Raiders, as they put up 17. Finally had an offensive touchdown for the first time in the month of October, or in the past month as a whole. But they don't look very good on either side of the ball. They're fine on defense because it's a Bill Belichick run defense. They're always going to be relatively decent, but their offense is really, really bad. Mac Jones continues to play really bad. He is still going to be the starter in this game, but I wouldn't be surprised if he got benched. The Buffalo Bills are going to be too much for the Patriots to take on, and I don't see this going too well for them. Moving on to another divisional matchup, as we've got a lot this week. We've got the Cardinals taking on the Seattle Seahawks. The Cardinals took on the Rams last week in a different divisional matchup and lost 9-26. They look really bad on both sides of the ball, again, just as people would have suspected at the beginning of the season. However, that wasn't the case for the first few weeks. It does seem to be more and more the case now as the season goes on. I don't see much from the Cardinals, whereas the Seahawks are a very competitive team. They did lose last week to the Bengals in a close game. I think their biggest problem was their red zone offense, just like the Ravens, as the Seahawks scored once in multiple red zone drives. They didn't even get points in a lot of those drives, but their offense was getting a lot of yards. Geno Smith continues to play really well with his receivers, and Kenneth Walker looks amazing on the ground, arguably one of the best running backs in the league. Zach Charbonnet behind him looks really good as well. They do have a really potent offense, and I don't see their struggles from last week holding up, especially against this Cardinals defense, so I do have the Seahawks winning this game. Moving on to our next matchup, we've got the Steelers taking on the Rams. The Rams having a big win over the Cardinals last week. Cooper Kupp finally seems back to form after his second week back. He looks really, really electric, keeping that offense alive. Kyren Williams also looked incredible, although he's unfortunately suffered an ankle injury and will not be playing in this game. I don't know what their answer will look like at running back, so I am a little concerned about that. Looking at the Steelers, they do have a really good defense, but their offense cannot do very much. They did have a bye last week, which was much needed. Maybe they'll get some flow coming back into their offense, but I really am not expecting much from that offense. Kenny Pickett continues to look really poor. Matt Canada, their offensive play caller, continues to be one of the worst play callers in the entire league, and I don't see much hope for this offense with Matt Canada in, although the Rams are not that dominant of a team, so maybe the Steelers can shut down the Rams' offense, but I do have the Rams with such an electrifying offense taking the win over the Steelers in this game. Moving to what is yet another divisional matchup, the Chargers taking on the Chiefs. The Chiefs got another win over the Broncos, and honestly, a win 19-8 over the Broncos doesn't impress me that much. I was expecting a lot more, and yes, the Broncos defense did look much improved, but the Broncos defense has continuously been one of the worst units in the entire league throughout the entire season, and yet the Chiefs only put up 19 on them. They did hold the Broncos to only 8 points on offense, which was pretty impressive, as the Broncos offense has not looked that bad this year. But overall, I was expecting a lot more from the Chiefs offense, and I was a little let down. Looking at the Chargers, though, they lost a heartbreaker to the Cowboys on Monday Night Football, 20-17. Justin Herbert, with his finger injury, did miss a couple throws to Keenan Allen, overthrew him a couple times in what could have been touchdowns. Their red zone offense also looked really bad. They scored a touchdown on the first drive, and then from there it was just field goals. But the Chargers and the Chiefs always play each other really close. It's always really good football. But the Chiefs tend to come out with the victory, and that's what I have here, is the Chiefs winning. Up next, we've got the Packers taking on the Broncos, and this is going to be a really poor game. Both teams are not very good, as the Packers are 2-3 and the Broncos are 1-4. Or rather, 1-5, actually. The Packers, coming off a much-needed bye after their big loss to the Raiders in the previous week. Jordan Love really struggled in that game, had multiple interceptions. Their offense really couldn't get much going, although Aaron Jones seemingly should be healthier and should be able to play to his full potential this week after having gotten a rest from his bye. The Broncos, as I just mentioned, lost to the Chiefs 8-19. They couldn't get anything going on offense, but their defense did look much improved from the worst unit in the league up to that point, as they only let up 19 to a very explosive Chiefs offense. I do think the Packers are still going to beat the Broncos, as I believe the Broncos are one of the worst teams in the entire league, and the Packers are just not very good. But I would not be surprised if this game turned out differently. Next up, we've got what is arguably going to be the game of the week. On Sunday Night Football, we have the Miami Dolphins taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. The Dolphins came out to a slow start against the Panthers. Were down 14-0 and then came back and won 21-42 with the only other touchdown they let up being from their backup quarterback Mike White throwing a pick six because the game was so out of hand. The Dolphins continued to look incredibly explosive. Tyreek Hill is on a record-setting pace, on pace for 2,300 yards, where the previous record is 1,960. He's at almost 1,000 yards after 6 weeks. He looks incredible. Jalen Waddle's finally back and healthy and looking really good. Raheem Mostert, yes, they are missing Devon Achane, but Raheem Mostert is holding down the fort at running back as he's leading the league in rushing touchdowns and touchdowns as a whole. He looks really good. They have no issues on offense whatsoever, and their defense is looking a lot improved after letting up those first 2 touchdowns to the Panthers. Looking at the Eagles, they let up a heartbreaker to the Jets, falling for the first time this season, 14-20. The Jets were able to score 20 points on this Eagles defense, which is concerning, but the main concern was Jalen Hurts throwing 3 interceptions in this game, which really cost them the entire game. They only put up 14 points on offense. A.J. Brown continues to look really dominant, but Devontae Smith is kind of nowhere to be found. They did just sign Julio Jones, but I don't see that being a needle mover in terms of an offensive move. I don't really think the Eagles are going to win this game. I think the Dolphins are too dominant, and the Eagles' defense is not dominant as dominant as it was last year, although it is very good. But I do think the Eagles' offense is just not going to be able to keep up with the Dolphins' explosive offense as they're going to be scoring at record-setting pace at week in and week out. So I do think the Dolphins are going to win this game, but it will be pretty close as these teams are both really good. And then our final game on Monday Night Football, we have the San Francisco 49ers taking on the Minnesota Vikings. The 49ers coming off a heartbreaking loss to the Browns as their rookie kicker Jake Moody missed 2 field goals, including the game winner 41-yard field goal to lose the game. Brock Purdy really did not look very good in this game. He threw his first interception on the season. He had less than 100 passing yards. Brandon Ayuk really couldn't get going. Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, and Trent Williams, arguably the 3 most important players on the 49ers offense, all got hurt. Trent Williams did luckily come back, but McCaffrey is questionable for this game, and so is Deebo, although they're both trending in the right direction, so hopefully they'll both play. The Vikings did just come off a win, though, against the Chicago Bears. It was a really ugly game. They should have put up more points than 19 against one of the worst defenses in the league in the Chicago Bears, but they only got 19 points the whole game and really only beat the Bears by 1 score with a backup quarterback and an injured O-line. It was a really bad look for the Vikings, even in a win. And I do have the 49ers taking the win here, as I just think they are still, despite the loss last week, one of the most dominant teams in the league, and the Vikings continue to be a very poor team. So I do have the 49ers coming out with a win here. But you guys let me know who you think is going to win each of these games. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll be back with you next week.